Hi, everybody. Welcome to CMN 201. My name is Lillian Ruiz. I am the instructor for the class. And what I wanted to do today was basically give you an overview of what it is we're going to be doing over the course of the semester. And then we can begin in earnest next week. And I know that we started the semester in a bit of an odd way because we had a snow day, but that is in no way going to impact what it is that we're going to be doing this semester. And I'll show you how the semester is laid out in a few moments. But I'm assuming that you can navigate Moodle, or else you wouldn't be watching this particular video. And if you look at the top of our Moodle page, you will see a general section. And that general section has several icons. And this is how you navigate our course. So I wanted to draw your attention to the first icon that says syllabus and other documents. And what you should find in that folder is a copy of our class syllabus and also the class outline. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And I always recommend to my students that they take hard copies so that they can have easy access to the class. I myself have a hard copy in front of me here. The choice is yours. And any of the documents that I would normally be distributing in a face-to-face class, any of the handouts would go in the syllabus and other documents folder. And then underneath that is past class sessions. So what you will find on our homepage is the current week that we are working on. And then what I do at the ending of the week is I retire that week and I put it in the past class sessions folder. So the current week is what's easily visible, but you can access the entire class throughout the semester by going in the past class sessions folder. And underneath that is a discussion form. And that is where you are going to be answering attendance questions that I'm going to be posting at the ending of each of these videos. And the discussion forum is trying to simulate what we might experience in a class discussion. So what you will see is that I will ask questions that are oftentimes opinion-based. I'm more interested in thinking than I am in regurgitation of facts. And what will happen is that I will ask you to read all of your classmates' responses. You don't necessarily need to reply to your classmates, though you're encouraged to. I think of it as raising your hand in class, where you can make the decision as to whether or not you want to participate in a face-to-face class. But you do need to read your classmates' responses and my responses in turn, because I will be responding to all of you. And that's where we will have our quote attendance unquote, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a few moments. Underneath that, you see an optional chat, which is just that, optional. So if you ever wanted to chat with your classmates or with me, you could do so there. And underneath that, you will see an optional Zoom. So if you were to click on that, what you will find is my Zoom information. And I am not using the Moodle grading program, but I will talk about the grading for the class in a bit, and you'll see that you can keep track of your own grading, and you could certainly reach out to me if you so wanted, so that I could give you a sense as to what your grades are in the class. But what I wanted to do was to review the syllabus. And again, the syllabus is in that folder that's entitled Syllabus and Other Documents. And you can see that at the top of the syllabus, there's just some contact information about the class itself. That this class is entitled The Social Impact of Mass Media. However, it has a theme, and the specific theme is the horror film in media and popular culture. So I teach media and popular culture classes. In fact, I teach an array of different kinds of classes. I am a professor in the English department, but I am a horror fan aficionado and teach a English class in Gothic literature, which is in some ways connected to horror film. So I'm hopeful that if you're in this class, you have an interest in the theme. I always tell students that if you're going to be having nightmares because we are discussing horror films and watching horror films, this is not the class for you. Usually, what I end up with is a group of students who have the same interest as I do and are looking to be scared, which is one of the things we'll talk about, is that why would someone willingly want to be scared? And you can see that my name is on there, Lillian Ruiz. Most people call me Lillian. I'm pretty informal, but feel free to call me whatever you feel comfortable with. My office phone is there, and that is located in my office, which is in North 328A, which is in the Inclusion and Diversity Center. So if you haven't had a chance to go to that area, I encourage you to visit. There's a little section for studying. There is a little kitchenette, and there also is a common seating area as well with some soft furniture and some games. And my office is located there as well. So if you are in support of any of the elements associated with inclusion and diversity, you are welcome. So I hope you come to visit. My office hours, which may or may not be of use to you since you are an online student, Monday through Thursday from 9 to 10 a.m. or by appointment. So I should be in my office Mondays through Thursday, 9 to 10, unless I'm at a meeting. But certainly we can make an appointment for a convenient time if that doesn't necessarily work for you. So text, because actually there has indeed been scholarship about the horror film, something that usually is viewed as a mode for entertainment and escapism, but as we'll talk about it, it can be quite symbolic and quite metaphoric. And I have 3 texts. We won't be necessarily reading them all in their entirety. We'll be reading pieces of them to sort of give us a background about how you can take this idea of horror film and turn it into something that's more academic. The first is entitled Projected Fears: Horror Films and American Culture by Phillips. The second is Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue, and that's by Madry. And lastly, Horror Film: A Critical Introduction, and that's by Leader. And these texts are available in the GCC library on reserve. So you can't take the texts out, but certainly you can photocopy or scan them. And yes, we are going to be using the text throughout the semester. I also have a note here that it's assumed that students will have a good dictionary and thesaurus for reference. Not that I'm asking you to go out and buy a dictionary or a thesaurus. I'm well aware that you probably have these electronic resources at hand, but having them and using them can be two very different things. So want to make sure that, because we will be doing some writing in class, that you are using all of the resources that you have access to. The thesaurus in particular is very useful for writing because it will offer synonyms, words with similar meanings, as well as antonyms, words with opposite meanings. So the course description is that this class is an in-depth focused analysis of a specific theme or topic, and our theme is the horror film in media and popular culture. And we are going to be examining this idea to examine social and cultural issues. Things like race, class, and gender are just a few of the topics that we could be discussing. And I recommend, and the catalog recommends, CMN 153, which is a media and popular culture class, introductory class. However, in terms of requirements, you're not required to take that class. If you want to take this class, they stand as independent units. So I believe we will be offering this class during the summer session, perhaps in the fall, I'm not certain. If you are interested in CMN 153, which we can talk more about as the semester progresses. For learning outcomes for this class, that as a result of successfully completing this course, we will summarize scholarship of various mass media, so to understand mass media's academic relevance. We'll recognize and articulate symbolic and metaphoric meanings, which means that we will have to define words such as symbolism and metaphor. So to understand or in various media, so to improve critical thinking skills. We will identify and analyze the cultural significance of mass media, in this instance, horror film, so to understand the influence of it in our society. We'll gather and appraise examples of various mass media, again, horror film, to identify some of the cultural and social anxieties of the time. And we will explain in oral and written form the uses, meanings, popularity of mass media, so to improve oral and written communication skills. I have that on all of my syllabi, regardless of the class. Basically, we will be understanding and drawing connections between mass media and ourselves, others, and society, so we can see its social, political, and cultural influence. We'll also evaluate and interpret data on the use and popularity of various mass media. So, what you might have heard is that a horror film that recently came out by the name of Sinners has just won the most Academy Award nominations of any film in the history of the Academy. And that's something that we will be revisiting as well as the semester progresses. And yes, we can examine social issues in horror film as well as cultural issues in horror film. So, procedures, how to do this in an online class. So, I teach both face-to-face classes and online classes, and I try to duplicate as much as possible in an online class what we would do in a face-to-face class. So, if we were meeting face-to-face, we would be meeting Thursday evening at 6 p.m. So basically, I'm going to be posting a video, much like this one, where I would be talking about class content every Thursday at 6 p.m., which means that the snow day would have been irrelevant for us because our first class, in theory, hasn't happened yet. That it would be happening on Thursday at 6 p.m. Of course, I'm going to be posting this particular class earlier at the start of the semester, and I'll be quite honest that I will try to post our videos before Thursday at 6 p.m., but what you can expect is that every Thursday at 6 p.m. is basically a class. And you have a 48-hour deadline to watch that particular video and to answer its corresponding attendance question. As I had indicated, there would be a question at the ending of the video that you would answer in your discussion form, and that would be counted as attendance for the particular class. So if you needed an extension, if you need a little bit more time, just ask me. I'll be happy to grant it to you. And then any additional interaction you have with your classmates in the discussion forum is basically participation, similar to participating in a live class. And I understand that some students learn best by participating, others learn best by listening, so you can decide how much or how little to participate. However, you do need to read all the discussion forum responses and my responses in turn. And then any of the written assignments that we have, such as papers and a final exam, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes, you would send to my email, which is ruiz, R-U-I-Z, at gcc.mass.edu via PDF, because my grading program works better that way. And in terms of my email, you might notice that it's just my surname, which is Ruiz, R-U-I-Z, no first initial. If you're wondering why, it's because when I started at GCC, we didn't have an email system set up yet, believe it or not. I started in 1993. And when we began setting up an email system, we were issued email addresses based on surname. And we quickly realized that that would lead to a lot of repetition, which is why, and redundancy, which is why we decided to add in the first initial. So if you see somebody with an email address that's only their surname, chances are they've been at GCC for quite a bit of time. And I ask that you use your GCC email address when you are corresponding with me rather than your private address, so it doesn't end up in a spam folder. So the course requirements, To complete all the reading and writing assignments by the due date, yes, we will be watching horror films over the course of the semester, and I will try to provide links for those whenever possible, free links on the internet, though I may not necessarily be able to find a free link on the internet for all of the films we'll be seeing. So you have the option of watching the films in the library if you so wanted, or of course you can always stream them. But the films are available in the library, or should be available in the library. What I'm going to have you do after each of the films that we're watching is to submit in an informal piece of writing about your reactions to the films. Some of the readings we will be doing are directly related to the films we'll be seeing. Some of those films are quite iconic. And I'm calling this a journal assignment. And if you are familiar with keeping a journal, you basically write informally about your personal life. An academic situation would mean that you're writing a journal about what it is you're studying in class. In this instance, it's horror film. But it's an informal piece of writing. And I'm going to be grading it in an informal way on a checkmark system, where a plus is excellent and a check plus is very good and a check is satisfactory. There is a less than satisfactory, that's a check minus, and an unsatisfactory, and that's a minus. But basically, I'm thinking about a page or so of writing, but as much or as little as you think you want to do about your reflections about the particular film that we're discussing that week. And then basically, we should have an exchange of assignments over the course of the semester. So, what will happen by the ending of the semester is that you will have a running commentary of all of the films. So that will certainly help you with the final exam. And the final exam is a cumulative final about the semester as a whole, essay examination. And again, I don't want to focus on the regurgitation of facts. What I want to do is to focus on thinking and analysis. But certainly you can utilize your journals and my responses on the journals for the final exam. So I can tell you right now how to prepare for that final. Do all the readings and watch all the films, submit in all the journals, and basically what you would do for the final is just synthesize all of that material. There is going to also be a final course project that would be due at the ending of the semester, though you could hand it in at any point, that I'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes, where basically you can do a focused analysis on something associated with our topic, which is horror film. So that said, there is an institutional services disability statement on the syllabus. So if you are a returning student to GCC, you probably have heard this before, but I just wanted to read it out loud. That Greenfield Community College values inclusion, equal access to its programs and activities, and is committed to fostering an environment of respect and full participation. Our goal is to create learning environments that are equitable, inclusive, and welcoming. There are aspects of the instruction or design of this course that result in barriers to your inclusion or accurate assessment or achievement. Please notify me as soon as possible. And if you're a student with a disability and you need a reasonable academic accommodation, please contact the Office of Disability Services as soon as possible to discuss your needs and options. And their contact information is on the syllabus. So, going back to those journals, there's a little blurb here that I'll read to you about the journals, that they're meant as an opportunity for students to analyze media. Guidelines will be very informal, as students should use the journals as an opportunity to explore the media in the way they feel would be most beneficial. That said, I'll sometimes give you suggestions in class, but on the whole, the journal should reflect whatever relevant thoughts or questions. Sometimes the questions are a lot more important than the answers that students might have about a particular form of media. The journals also provide an excellent opportunity to brainstorm or free write final project topics, and also can assist you with the final exam. And again, I'm grading it on a checkmark scale where a plus is excellent, a good is check plus, satisfactory is check. That's where most of the grades land. But there also is a less than satisfactory and an unsatisfactory. And you would submit the journals via PDF to my email. So that discussion form that I was talking about that you will be answering each week after each video is basically trying to duplicate attendance and class discussion. Class activity and discussion is extremely important, can't be made up. So absences and tardiness will be negatively reflected in your participation grade. There is a participation grade, which I'll talk about in a bit. And while each case is different, anything more than 2 absences could lower your grade. Excessive absences could even result in failure. Thus, ask for an extension if you're unable to meet a deadline. Consultations, you can meet with me during office hours, as I had indicated, or make an appointment. So the final course project, let me talk a little bit about what the text is here in the syllabus. The final course project is probably a written analysis of horror film and mass media, although there is room for more creative approaches. Guidelines will be discussed in class. Because after all, this is a media class. So if you wanted to use media, for instance, in your final project. So I have had students who've done things like create short horror films. I once had a student create a horror a film video game. So you can do some creative things. If you go to the GCC library, I believe they have on display one of the final projects from one of my students where they ended up doing a model of some of the more important scenes in seminal horror films, which some commentary about why those scenes were important. So I suspect most of you will rely on the traditional paper. So if you are writing the traditional paper, there's just some information here about formatting that, again, we'll review in greater depth as the semester progresses. I know I'm giving you a lot of information. I don't expect you to remember all of this information. I just want you to have it in front of you, so to speak, so that you've got a sense of what's coming up over the semester. And then we can revisit these pieces as they become applicable. But basically, when you're writing a paper, your text should be typed and double-spaced and have 1-inch borders. Hopefully this sounds familiar from English classes. Pages should be numbered, and cover pages, which is just a separate sheet of paper or a separate screen if you're handing in something electronically, should include a title, your name, the course and section number, my name, and the due date. And again, you would be submitting that to my email. You do have the option, perhaps, of revising your graded project subject to the permission of the instructor. So a lot of it will depend on when you get that project in, if there's enough time for a revision. So, and I can't necessarily give you a date, just the sooner that you would hand it in, the better off you are. It's due at the ending of the semester so that you've got the entire semester basically to choose for your final project. But at any point that you're thinking that you have an idea for your final project, you can run it by me and then you can begin and you can hand it in. And if you do end up revising your final project, you want to submit in the original graded project with my commentary along with your revision. That would be due by the very ending of the semester. I'm going to skip the sections on plagiarism and artificial intelligence for now and talk a little bit about them next class and just go straight to the grading section. And these are approximate percentages. 25%, which is a large proportion of your grade, is participation. And that's answering those discussion forum questions, doing any in-class assignments and activities and so forth. So that's one way you can positively impact your grade. 25% are those journals, which again are graded informally. So that's another way that you can positively impact your grade. And I'm not evaluating these journals for grammar or mechanics, but that doesn't mean that you should be sloppy. I'm reviewing them in terms of content. It's as if we were having a conversation on paper, back and forth. Course project, that final course project, 25%, which you might have the option of revising if you were to submit it in early enough. And 25% that final exam, that open book, open note exam. If we were taking the exam in class, you'd have approximately 2 to 3 hours to respond to it. It would be a series of essay questions from which you get to choose. Obviously, we are not in a face-to-face class. So what I will do is I will post the final on our last day, and you would have 24 hours in which to submit in that final. And no, you're not expected to spend 24 hours working on it. You're expected to spend perhaps a couple of hours working on it, but you would have 24 hours. And the grading for an A excellent, a B good, C satisfactory. And there are other letters that follow the C. I'm aware of that. But I prefer not to talk about those in terms of evaluation, especially not on the first day of class. And you can see that there's some criteria here for essay evaluation that I will be talking about in greater depth as the semester goes on. But what I wanted to do was to focus on the course outline, which is also included in the syllabus and other documents folder. And again, I encourage you to take a hard copy of it so it's easily accessible. And this basically is the plan for the entire semester, with a couple of caveats. Dates and assignments might be subject to change. The readings ideally should be completed before the dates indicated below, because on those dates is when I'm going to be discussing those readings. And as I had indicated earlier, not all of the films may be freely available on the internet, but you would still be responsible for seeing those films. And lastly, I think probably everybody knows this, but pursuant to the character of the genre, some of the course material is graphic in nature. So if you would look at our outline, you will see that week 1 is listed as Thursday, the 29th, and you are probably watching this beforehand, but if not, it is our introduction. So all I plan to do is basically give you an overview of the course itself. Week 2, which means that next Thursday by the 5th of February, and I'm hoping to be able to post the night beforehand, but certainly by that Thursday on the 5th, you will see another video, and I will be discussing from the text Horror, Film, and Fear, or I will be discussing Horror, Film, and Fear from the text Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue. I'll also be discussing the introduction from the text Projected Fears, And I also will be discussing what is horror, why of horror, and critics of censors. And that you can find in the text Horror Film. Now, if you still don't have the text by next week, don't panic. This is still introductory material. And I'm keeping that in mind in terms of the way that I'm structuring that particular class. And you're not going to have a journal until a couple of classes later. So that gives us enough time to settle in, do the readings, and talk a little bit more about how to construct journals. Week 3 is when we actually begin viewing horror film. And what I've done is I've divided the class up by decade, having a film represent each decade. And the origins of horror film begin in the 1920s, as we will discuss. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is considered to be the first horror film made, or the first feature-length horror film made in 1920. So we will be viewing that, and yes, not only is it in black and white, it's a silent film because it was in 1920. So if you've never seen a silent film, it's a very different kind of experience. And it is a wonderful example of German expressionism. It's oftentimes studied in film classes for that. And I also teach a literature and film class. The readings assigned for that week would be Origins in Film Gothic and Genreification from the book Nightmares in Horror Film. So basically that gives us a little bit of background of what we will be watching with the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And then it's week 4. So the 19th of February is when you would be submitting in your first journal, though you could certainly submit it in earlier. And the first journal will be about the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, because by that point we would have viewed the film, we would have discussed it in the context of our class, so you could use any of that information. We would have had a discussion forum response, so you can use any of those elements as well in your response to the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. For your journal, again, I'm thinking about a page or so, but as long or as short as you think it needs to be based on your interests and your thoughts and your reflections. Again, graded informally on a checkmark system. So basically, you'll have a journal due for the film we're watching about a week afterwards. So that gives us a little bit of time to talk about the film. The next film we're going to be watching, and this represents the 1930s. We'll be seeing this on the 19th of February. It's considered to be the first American horror film. Dr. Caligari, a German film. And the first American horror film would be 1931, Dracula. Very iconic with Bela Lugosi. The readings I have scheduled are studio horrors of the 1930s, Reality Bites, pun intended, and a little bit about Todd Browning, who happens to be the director for Dracula. And then, since we will be watching Dracula in week 4, your journal won't be due until week 5 on Dracula. What we will do in week 5, which is the 26th of February, is talk about the 1940s, a lesser known film called Cat People, but really very stylistic and quite interesting in terms of the time period. So you will be doing readings about horror film for that week called Shadow Play, and also film from 1939 to 1973, because basically we will be continuing with talking about more contemporary films. And I've deliberately put them in chronological order so that we can see progression. On the 5th of March is when we get to horror film of the 1950s. And we will talk about Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which came out in 1956. We'll talk about also how horror film is closely related to other genres, such as science fiction, which is what Invasion of the Body Snatchers is in some respects. And the readings we'll do are Thing from Another World and Body Snatchers. These are the topics from the required text. And then the week after that puts us into the 1960s, where I cheated a little bit, I'll be honest. I've been using one film to represent a decade, the 1960s, such a turbulent era that I ended up choosing 2 films from the beginning of the 1960s and the ending of the 1960s. So the first film is Psycho, and it's iconic. And, Alfred Hitchcock is considered to be the father of the modern horror film. We'll talk about that. Hitchcock being the director for Psycho. And we will be doing some readings about Psycho and Hitchcock and the American Gothic. Then we have a spring break, so we wouldn't be meeting that particular week. And then when we return, we go back to the ending of the 1960s, part 2. And we will watch Night of the Living Dead, directed by George Romero, who basically created a new genre, the zombie genre, at least in the way that we think of zombies from a contemporary standpoint. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And some of you might have heard that actually this class was an offshoot of a special topics class that I taught years ago about zombies, believe it or not. A class that was initially offered at Harvard, and then other schools began offering it. It was when The Walking Dead was first released, so it was very much in the zeitgeist of our culture. But obviously, this class is much broader than that topic, even though we will be discussing zombies with Night of the Living Dead and apocalypse films and George Romero. And then in the 1970s, we'll talk about the cultural phenomenon of The Exorcist. And it was a cultural phenomenon, as we will discuss. We'll do some readings about The Exorcist, as well as in our textbook, there's some information about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which came out in the same decade. We won't be viewing that film, though you might be familiar with it. And we'll also be doing some readings from the 1970s to the present for horror film. And then the 1980s, again, I cheated a little bit because technically the film came out in 1978, but it influenced so many films of the 1980s. Halloween. So if you are familiar with the slasher genre, it began with Halloween in 1978. So we'll do some readings about Halloween and also about gender in horror film, one entitled Shrinking Man, and also some readings about John Carpenter, the director. 1990s. The film I've chosen is The Blair Witch Project. One of the reasons why is because I think in many respects it was prophetic about the role that technology plays and will end up playing in our lives, both in the 1990s and up until 2026. And we'll talk a little bit about postmodern horror and digital horrors in relation to the Blair Witch Project. And on the 23rd of April, we get to the 2000s. This was also another prophetic film. Not that anybody could have anticipated COVID-19 at that point. The film is entitled 28 Days Later, which is about a viral infection and the consequences of that viral infection going mainstream, in effect. If you are a fan of 28 Days Later, then you know that there are sequels. One of them is 28 Weeks Later. I'm not the biggest fan of it. The newest sequel is 28 Years Later, and 28 Years Later has 3 parts. And the second part of 28 Years Later just came out, and it's entitled The Bone Temple. And I just saw it. It's quite excellent, in my opinion. But we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get closer to 28 Days Later, where you will be reading things like the importance of sound for horror films, which I think 28 Days Later in particular uses well. But of course, other horror films have done that as well. Psycho is a wonderful example, which we will discuss. That gets us into the 2010s, and this is really the motivator for the topic of this class. Because in the 2010s, 2017, I saw the film Get Out in theaters. And I remember at the ending of watching it in the theater, I was just blown away at its brilliance. And this is the way that critics felt as well. It won Academy Awards. So that particular film is the reason why this class exists. And if you've seen the film before, and we'll talk about this as well, certainly you've got a bit of an advantage because you already know the plot. But if you're really going to study film and cinema carefully, you want to rewatch over and over again, and that's where you could get the details. And Get Out is a highly literary film with lots of Easter eggs, foreshadowing, symbolism, metaphor. It's really incredibly put together. And then horror film in the 2010s is how we end our semester. And I'm still looking for a horror film to represent the 2020s. We are a little bit past the midway point of this decade. And thus far, what I'm thinking is that Sinners will be the film. I also saw that in the theaters, and again, I was blown away, and so is the Academy. But that said, who knows what film might be coming out in the next few years that could represent the 2020s. I've got a catch-up class for us in the event that we need it, and that would be on the 7th of May, and that is our last journal when it is due Get Out. And then finally we have on the 14th of May the final exam, and again I will be posting the final on the 14th, and you would have 24 hours in which to respond to that final. Submit it in to me via PDF to my email. That would be the very last day that you can hand in your final course project. But early submissions are definitely encouraged. But that would mean by the 14th, you would have viewed all of the films in the class. So that might help you with determining a project topic, which I will talk a little bit more about as the semester progresses and offer you some ideas. But you are also free to create your own as long as you get it approved by me beforehand, and it's in one way or another connected to what it is that we're doing with the class. So that's basically the class as a whole. What's left is our attendance question. So today's attendance question is pretty straightforward. It's just asking you to introduce yourself to the class, and feel free to upload video or audio. Not required, but feel free to do so. And then what we will do next class is begin our introduction of why we are focusing on media and popular culture and why that focus is going to be on horror film. So I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well, and we will continue on next class. Take care. Bye-bye.